Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Be the Church podcast, where we are engaging in conversations that will encourage you to live out your faith in everyday context so that you can be the church. I am the producer, Isaiah Fetterman.
I'm one of your co-hosts, Theo Lightborn.
And I'm one of your other co-hosts, Kevin Anderson.
If you're tuning in with us for the first time, welcome. We are currently going through Donald Whitney's book, Spiritual Disciplines for the Christian Life. And today we are on chapter 10 of the book, which is about silence and solitude. So I hope you guys are excited. I know I'm excited. I feel like I say this about every single topic that we talk about, but it feels like I'm going to get hit hard, and it's always
You're
relevant.
just excited a lot, Josh.
I am excited a lot.
Excitable person.
But I feel like every chapter we've done just has really hit home in just another area to grow in. And I mean, that's the reality for all these spiritual disciplines. So yes. So without further ado, let's hop right in and get going. With that, for those who may not have been with us this whole time so far, we do a quick recap. And to get you up to speed, Kevin, what are spiritual disciplines?
Just simply put, they're things that we do intentionally in order to follow God and grow closer to Him. And there are both what we would call personal spiritual disciplines that are solely centered around ourselves and things that we do. And then there are corporate disciplines, and both of which God uses. So,
yeah, absolutely. So with that, Theo, why are they important?
So spiritual disciplines are important because they're the means by which we become like Jesus Christ. And this the means by which we come to understand Jesus Christ. So spiritual disciplines are vastly important.
Absolutely. And with that, we move to this week's spiritual discipline, which is silence and solitude. I just wanted to give you a quick example of silence. So, so with that, Theo, we'll start with you this week. Ooh, yay. How exciting. What does it mean to be silent and to have solitude?
So I really enjoyed how the book defined both of these words. So I'm just going to use the book's definition. So the discipline of silence is the voluntary and temporal abstination from speaking so that certain spiritual goals might be sought. And the discipline of solitude is the voluntary and temporary withdrawing to privacy for spiritual purposes. So that's how I would define that. That's how you would define both silence and solitude from a biblical perspective.
Absolutely. So with that, because it is fairly straightforward, this idea of silence and solitude, we do kind of want to hop right into, jumping in to the question of why do we struggle to find silence and solitude, Theo?
Yeah, so this is such a great question because when you think about silence and solitude, I would imagine that for most people, this is something that is like in no way something interesting or something that's appealing to you, primarily because it's very countercultural. Like our culture is like built around noise and around activity.
Yes, it is.
And just this idea of trying to be silent and solitary is completely countercultural. I love this quote from the book. It said, in her book, Finding Focus in a Whirlwind World, Jean Fleming observed, we live in a noisy, busy world. Silence and solitude fit the era of Victorian lace, high-button shoes, and kerosene lamps better than our age of television, video arcades, and joggers wired with earphones. We have become a people with an aversion to quiet and an uneasiness with being alone. This is confirmed by the inability of many to ever be at home or in the car by themselves without turning on some background noise. Unlike previous generations, technology now makes it possible for us to enjoy the benefits of news, music, educational content, and more whenever we want and wherever we are. But the downside is that the appeal and accessibility of these things means the elimination of almost all quiet spaces in our lives. So, sorry about that. You probably didn't hear that too well, but so basically, being a person who seeks silence and solitude is just something that's like from a bygone era and completely countercultural to the way American society functions.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think something to consider when kind of processing through this, and this is something I preached on, gosh, probably almost 2 years ago
Yeah.
now at this point. Um, I preached through Psalm 62, and it starts out like this. This is a Psalm of David, and he says this: "For God alone, my soul waits in silence. From Him comes my salvation. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be greatly shaken." And he goes on to share with us how he's finding his refuge and his hope in God and all that. And what's really interesting about that to me though is before he starts singing the praises of God as being his rock, his salvation, his fortress, he first goes to this place where he quiets his soul. He says, "For God alone, my soul waits in silence." And really, we obviously preached that entire psalm, but everything was centered around that first line in verse 1. This idea of waiting before the Lord in silence and hearing from Him was something that David considered to be abundantly and exceedingly important in his own life. And so one of the questions that kind of came out of just our time studying that psalm and thinking through it was this idea of, well, okay, if David is telling himself and he's singing about the need for his soul to be silent and to wait in silence, then there must be a tendency for us as human beings to have noisy souls, to constantly have something drawing our attention, our affections, our hopes, our dreams. And so I started, just wrestling through, what does it even mean to have a noisy soul? And there's kind of a number of things that came out of both my sermon and talking to other people. So I just want to share a few of those things with you guys, because this isn't something that was in the book per se, but I think it's something that coincides really, really well with what Whitney talks about in the book. Some key characteristics that you may display if you are struggling with a noisy soul. The first one would be that you lack an ability to listen, and I don't mean you lack an ability to listen to music or a podcast or whatever else. What I mean is you lack the ability to just listen to somebody else's opinion or hear from somebody without needing to insert your opinion or your thought or something else that may be going on. Another thing that we found and we kind of talked through is that if you are exhibiting a noisy soul, you tend to lack the ability to reflect meaningfully on your life. And I actually think Whitney did touch on that. Maybe not in that exact language, but he touches on that in the book. One of the primary things I think I see both in my own life, but and in the lives of people that we minister to, one of the biggest struggles I see people having is the ability to honestly and openly reflect on the reality of what's going on in their lives. And in that, understand why things may be the way that they are in a given situation. And so um, there tends to be this struggle to understand why they might be suffering, or understand why they might be stuck in a sinful pattern, or understand why they haven't heard from the Lord. And oftentimes God gets blamed for that, when in reality, it's their own inability to kind of quiet themselves down and just think about like what is going on in my life? Where is my attention being drawn? Where is my gaze being centered? What is distracting me? If you never slow down and give yourself time to be silent and quiet, you're going to really struggle to do this. And I'm sure you guys could cite examples in your own life where this is a reality, because I think we all can. But I think what we're seeing in the book is that, hey, this is something that you have to intentionally force yourself to do if you're going to grow, even in some of these other disciplines, but grow closer to God. There needs to be some intentional work to carve out quiet and solitude. One of the other things that we said is that if you may be struggling with a noisy soul, you might lack deep and meaningful relationships. We've got lots of people in our church that they've got 150 friends, but those friendships are an inch deep and a mile wide. And so, there's no one knows them deeply. No one knows the things that they struggle with. And in that, there then tends to be a tendency to struggle through life because they're not known. They're not allowing themselves to be known. And they're called blind spots for a reason. And other people see them when you can't.
Yeah.
And it's super important.
And I definitely know a lot about that.
Well, I think one of the things, though, that always encourages me about you, Isaiah, is that although you tend to be someone that runs a very frenetic lifestyle of wanting to be around people all the time and wanting to know people and love on people and be around people, is that what I know about you is you also take the charge of meaningful relationships seriously, which causes you at times to have to surrender your preference of being around 50 people to be around one person.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely developed over time, as well as I've learned to make moments of silence and solitude and force myself to be around less people because I know it's wiser. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. I think one of the last things that we see, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, but one of the last things that we can see in people if you're struggling with a noisy soul is that you lack the ability to rest meaningfully. And so, can you lay on the couch for 20 minutes and not do anything? Like, I know people that really struggle to do that. Like they get antsy and they have to get up and do something. And I've got kids. I mean, I would love to rest meaningfully on the couch for 20 minutes. The last 2 times I've taken naps, it's involved my 5-year-old crawling on me and wrestling me while I'm literally half asleep on the couch. And so, and I cherish that, because I'm gonna look back and want those days again one day. But the people with a noisy soul really struggle to just rest, to just stop and be able to do nothing. And I think it's important to remember that not only is that good for us, but it's actually commanded by God.
Yeah.
That it's for our good. And I've had people ask, like, why did God do that? I say God built in sleep and he built in a Sabbath to lovingly remind us that we are not the center of the universe and the world does not revolve around us, and that the world will go on just fine if we take a day off, and the world goes on just fine when you go down to bed every night. It's a built-in reminder that God gives us that the universe revolves around him and not us. And so I think it can just be a helpful reminder that God designed us to need to rest. If you struggle to rest in meaningful ways, you may have a noisy soul, and there may be some things that you need to kind of root out of your life to be able to sit and relax. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis, where he says this in Mere Christianity, but I thought it applied well to just this idea of us needing to rest and more importantly, seek the Lord in silence and solitude. God made us. He invented us as man invents an engine. A car is made to run on petrol. There's the Britishness of him coming out, right? And it would not run properly on anything else. Now, God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. And so there's just this real beauty there that C.S. Lewis is trying to get us to understand is, hey, we need the Lord, and that means biblically right? We need times of silence and solitude to just seek him and rest in him and let that kind of re-energize us and recharge us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say like those are great reasons why we need silence and solitude. As we transition to this next part, we're talking about, going from some of the reasons we struggle to be in silence and solitude to really talking about, okay, so we see it's hard, we see it's a challenge, but why is it still important? And I think you made some good points there at the end, but, are there other reasons as well? Theo, would you like to give some insight?
Yeah, so there are so many reasons why silence and solitude is important. And I'm just going to break into one of those reasons right now. I would strongly encourage you guys to go ahead and read the book and really focus in and zone in
Yeah.
on this particular chapter. I know that for the three of us, this really fed our soul to kind of reflect on this idea, particularly as a spiritual discipline. But one of the first areas that I really particularly enjoyed that I felt like was a little countercultural to the way you typically think in church is that worship can be done silently and in solitude.
Mm.
And let me just read to you a couple aspects from the book that talked about that. The worship of God does not always require words, sounds, or actions. And for a lot of people, just that idea by itself can be a paradigm shift. When we think of worship music, we think of worship services, and all of those things are corporate and those things are loud and noisy. So just
Yeah.
this idea initially is a little bit jarring in and of itself. Sometimes worship consists of a God focused stillness and hush. Scriptural precedent for this includes texts like Habakkuk 2:20. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Zephaniah 1:7. Be silent before the Lord God. And Zechariah 2:13. Be silent, all flesh, before the Lord. Notice that it's not just a silence that's enjoined, but a silence before him, before the Lord, and before the Lord God. That's not merely silence, it's a worshipful silence. There are times to speak to God, and there are times simply to behold and adore Him in silence. And I can just give a personal testimony to the fact that, like, worshiping the Lord in perfect silence, um, it can be a little bit unusual at first, but it's so rewarding because you're really able to plug in and to kind of zone into God in a way that you can't any other way. So it's one of those things that I feel like is really engaging, and it's to go back to what Kevin said a moment ago, it really allows us to have the opportunity to go deeper with the Lord. It allows us to connect with Him in a way that we wouldn't normally connect with Him. So because of that, so why is it important? One is because you can worship, and then there are so many other reasons why silence and solitude are so valuable to your soul. I'll give this one last testimony. When I was coming to Aletheia, there was a point in my life where I was trying to decide between Aletheia and another church here in the city of Gainesville, Florida. And the night that I made that decision, I just really realized that I needed to make a decision. I was kind of going between the two churches. And that night, I walked into my apartment, my apartment where I live, and it was totally dark. And I walked straight back to my bedroom, and I just laid on the floor with my face just straight on the ground. And I just asked the Lord to give me direction. And that time of silence and solitude was so formative and so powerfully used by God to give me clarity around a decision. I can't tell you that God audibly spoke to me in that moment, but I can tell you that in that moment, God aligned my heart towards Aletheia, towards this church. He gave me clarity in my soul. Um, and a lot of this is kind of very spiritual talk that's hard to understand unless you have the Holy Spirit. But I pray that as you engage in this discipline, you'll be able to understand exactly how the Lord uses this for our
Yeah.
benefit.
It's good. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely something that, as Kevin was talking about earlier, can bring rest. And then we see this worship and then seeking guidance and so on. And the book has great explanations of those. But we are going to move on into kind of more of a practical sense
Mhm.
of what are good ways to practice this, and like to give a little emphasis on this. Like this is not easy to do sometimes. I mean, like I know Kevin and I know Theo, and I know with COVID-19 hitting, like things have been really busy and crazy. And it's something we
Yeah.
have to fight for, to make that time, like between me trying to figure out tech stuff and working at the same time. Like I have very little free time, and I know Theo is doing a lot of stuff for the church and figuring out what we have to do in terms of COVID. And then Kevin has a family and is trying to pastor long distance and do a lot of things. And like with that, like not to like make it sound amazing, but more along the lines to say how hard it can be to find silence and solitude amidst a busy schedule, but how vital it is. And I'm going to say, like, this has been a challenge for me, and something that some of the people in the community around me have like pressed me, like, this is something that could really help it, and something that you might need to press into it, and have pushed me to make time, even though I don't want to. But, something that I have so appreciated, just to let my mind rest and calm down and just like see the Lord work
Mm.
in me.
It's good.
So with that, like we want to encourage you guys, this is possible, and here are some practical ways to do that. So with that, I'll ask the question one last time. What are good ways to practice this?
Yeah, I think some of the easiest things you could do, set some goals. If you found, when I was going through that list of kind of indicators of a noisy soul, you're like, hey, that's true of me. I would just set some goals. And here's the thing about goal setting. I know we're getting into like more like leadership type stuff here at this point and practical things, but I think it's helpful. Set goals that are realistic. I think we've said that multiple times as we've been doing these different podcasts on these spiritual disciplines. I
Right.
think most of the time people end up giving up and stopping this kind of stuff because they set a goal that's unrealistic. If you're not reading your Bible at all, it's probably not realistic to think that you can read through the entire Old and New Testament in the next 60 days. That's not a realistic goal. Um, Maybe you just need to read your Bible for 5 minutes for the next
Right.
2 weeks. So set short goals, set realistic goals, and instead of making their time period be over a long period of time when you haven't displayed any faithfulness in this particular discipline, set a goal that's closer. Okay, for the next 5 days, I'm going to, when I get home in the evening, I'm going to go back to my room and I'm just going to lay down on my bed and whatever I feel led to do, whether it's pray, meditate, listen, read my Bible, I'm just going to do one of those things in complete silence for 5 minutes. And I'm going to do that for the next 5 days. I'm just going to see what happens. And here's what I think often ends up happening is as you set those goals and you commit to doing it, God blesses that. Not partially because of our obedience or whatever else, but two, he just promises to meet us in those types of things anyway, that you're going to be encouraged to do more. So at the end of that 5 days, you're like, I did it for 5. I'm gonna set the goal for the next 7 days then, or whatever it may be. So just setting goals of when you can get some silence,
Yeah.
where you're going to get some silence, and how long you're going to get some silence and solitude for. I think in setting those goals, you're going to maybe potentially, depending on what your home situation looks like, you might need to get away.
Definitely
You
in my
know,
home situation.
right? For me, for the last 6 months, that's what it's needed to be.
Yeah.
Now my kids are back in school and my wife is teaching. I have it built in every morning after I help them get ready for school and load them up in the van and say goodbye. I've got the house to myself. It's nice, quiet solitude before I leave and start my day. Right? I've got it built in there now
Right.
into my routine. But it has not looked like that previously. And so there needed to be some adjustment and some change. I remember one night in particular during a stay-at-home order, I was just feeling completely overwhelmed, exhausted, tired. There was nowhere to hide. There's nothing to do. And I just looked at Jackie and said, I'm going out for a walk or something. I'll be back when I get back. I was gone for 45 minutes. And I just needed that time to decompress, be alone, pray, enjoy that silence and that solitude. And the cool thing is Jackie got some while I was gone. as well because the kids were already asleep. And so just getting away, I think another one is in that getting away, something I just shared there, even and working with Jackie,
Yeah.
is working with others to trade off responsibilities. So I don't try to neglect or shirk my responsibility to help with the kids in the morning. So instead, I know when I wake up, my first hour or so is completely spent on getting them ready and helping because Jackie needs to get ready for work. And so I can help get those kids out the door and bless her and serve my kids. Then once they're out, then I know, okay, then I'm going to have this opportunity to spend some time with the Lord. And I think in working with Jackie and knowing that, right, she now knows that Kevin's time for some solitude and quietness with the Lord is right after I leave. So I've got some added accountability there to where
Yeah.
she can know, hey, this is the time Kevin's frequently, spending time with the Lord. She knows not to try to contact me or text me or whatever else
Right.
during that time. And if I'm responding to a text or something in that time, there's kind of a, hey, this was sent for you to respond to later. Not right now.
Right.
You're supposed to be getting some silence and solitude
For sure.
right now. So it frees me up to be intentional, but it also adds a layer of accountability that's really, really good for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so good. And like, as being someone that lives in a house with many people and sharing a room, like it's definitely good to get away for that. And like that's something that I basically have to do. So for me, I know one of the things that I've like to do is I try to get into my office early because no one else is there early. So like I have it to myself and I can really focus in that time. COVID has changed that a little bit, but hopefully we'll be getting back into that rhythm soon enough. And then I think with that, a huge thing is having people who kind of like just find their spot and like having a specific location, like, and this can be really hard to find sometimes, but, a place where they know it can be quiet and they can go to regularly, and making that place. And sometimes it might even be your car. Like, I know some people that just go for a drive. One of my friends in college would just be like, "Yeah, I'm gonna be gone for a little while. I'm just gonna drive," and he would just drive to nowhere in particular and would just process and pray. So,
That's good.
yeah. Um, with that, I think the reality is we can talk about ways to do this, but I think on the converse, it's also good to kind of process through what are maybe some unhealthy ways to do this. Because I think a lot of people will jump on this idea of silence and solitude and go the complete unhealthy route and maybe do this in not the greatest way possible. So, Theo, do you have any insight into maybe, what are some unhealthy perspectives on silence and solitude that we should avoid?
Yeah, so silence and solitude is not an excuse to be a loner, and not an excuse to put yourself into a place where you're socially isolated. God has made us for community, and more importantly, God has made us for Himself. And so there's a way to do both. And I really enjoy how the book kind of breaks apart those two ideas in this way. Basically, the book says silence and solitude is the complementary discipline to biblical fellowship. Biblical fellowship is not talking about random things, but it's talking about God and the things of God. And I remember even as I read that part of the book, how I was challenged in my life and in my soul to kind of consider that. Like I spend quite a bit of time around Christians and around believers. And I question when I'm around Christians and believers, how often am I speaking about God and the things of God?
Mm.
Rather than things related to church or the operation of the church or things related to disciplines or the operation of disciplines. But rather, fellowship is truly to be speaking about and thinking about God. So I was really challenged in that way as I thought about this idea of biblical fellowship. And biblical fellowship and silence and solitude both have a place in a Christian's life, in a biblically consistent believer. Without silence and solitude, we can be active but shallow. And without fellowship, we can be deep but stagnant. So I really like how the book talked about how Christ likeness requires both to be in harmony for us to be truly faithful, biblically consistent Christians.
Yeah, I definitely think that's huge in talking about, just spending time with people isn't necessarily healthy enough in and of itself, but having intentionality in that time. And I think that's a really good qualifier to pair with, what fellowship should look like paired with the silence and solitude on the other side.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that silence and solitude brings into that is when I mentioned earlier the inability to meaningfully reflect on life.
Mm.
I think if you're pairing these two things together, it'll help you have some wisdom and discernment on how these relationships are moving forward. Hey,
Yeah.
is the time I'm spending in these situations really a proper reflection of what God's trying to do in my life right now? And is it really a valuable use of my time or an investment of my time?
Yeah.
And so pairing these two things together kind of ends up um, having them lock arms and be better for your soul than just trying to solely focus on one and only do one.
Yeah.
It also kind of gave me this little bit of a foretaste, so to speak. Sorry for the old school word. My mind's on Bible things right this second. A little foretaste of talking about the corporate disciplines.
Yep.
Like it's going to be really enjoyable to talk about this idea of what true fellowship is and how to engage in that within the community of believers, and how like spiritually strengthening it can be to have that type of a fellowship. And
Yeah.
so basically, Fetterman, to answer your question, what we're trying to say right now is that it's unhealthy for you to take this idea of silence and solitude to the place where you believe that you should just lock yourself away and socially isolate yourself from all people. Like that is inconsistent. That is not what the Lord would call us to do. He calls us to have balance. And in so many ways, throughout all of these disciplines, we need balance. We need to pray alone, and we need to pray with the community. We need to read the Bible alone. We need to read the Word with others. All of these disciplines have a corporate aspect and a private aspect to them, so that we can be able to truly follow and obey the Lord to the best of our ability.
Absolutely. Would you like to add anything to the end here, Kevin?
No, I just think one of the cool things we see about uh, just this discipline or any of them as we're kind of getting towards the end of our time in this book, just how beautiful it is that the Lord causes these different things to work together and work in tandem, and just how beneficial it can be to us as we start developing some of these disciplines. Like if you are able to develop the discipline of being able to um, seek silence and solitude, other disciplines are probably going to start coming more naturally to you. Prayer, Bible intake, um, being able to fast meaningfully. A lot of the things that we have talked about on this podcast over the last several months, um, they work together and they feed one another, and the ways that they feed our souls push us towards Christ likeness and knowing Him better. And so I just, it's just one of the many, many times as I sit, even while we're here talking, right, have the opportunity to just take a step back and say, like, God's design is just so beautiful and it's for our good. And, it would be easy to get frustrated and say, I want silence. I don't want silence and solitude. And I don't like that. And all these different things. And then yet when you actually participated in it and seek it, you see how beneficial it is in your life.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So thanks for talking with us about silence and solitude.
You forgot the word thanks.
No, I wanted to just have a moment of silence again. Sorry,
throwing me off.
I like to. I'm just being a little cheesy here, like I usually am. So,
hopefully, people out there realize that by now.
Yes, hopefully. If not, it's going to come out more, and I apologize as I get more and more comfortable in this position here with you guys talking every couple weeks. So with that, we've really enjoyed talking today about silence and solitude, and we're really excited about what is coming up in our next podcast, which is the topic of journaling. That is chapter 11 of the book, and we're excited to go into it. And that means we are yet one chapter, 1 week closer to finishing the book and not having anything to talk about. So please, would you help us have something to talk about and send us a message at podcast@aletheagainesville.com. Again, I'll say podcast@aletheagainesville.com. I don't know why I always say it in double now, but it's just more exciting. And with that, thank you so much. And now go and be the church. Wait, there's the tagline.
I didn't have that memorized yet. I love it.
No, I don't. I am terrible at memorization. So you're going to see me reading this for a few more months before we get it.
My son would run circles around you. He memorized all the books of the Old Testament in under 24 hours.
I'm proud of him.